everyone, and welcome to Reuters at Davos 2025. I'm Nazanin Moshiri. As global leaders gather to tackle the pressing challenges of our time, the recurrent theme has been the need to build financial inclusivity. From bridging the digital divide to creating sustainable economies, the role fintechs can play in achieving this has never been more apparent. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Martha Sazon, who is the CEO and President of GCash, and Philippine Finance Secretary Ralph Recto. We'll be discussing how fintech innovation is driving financial inclusion in the Philippines and helping to empower underserved communities and contribute to economic resilience. Thanks so much for joining us here in Davos.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Secretary Ralph Recto, I'm going to start with you. We're going to talk about public-private collaboration, a great example that we have here today. It's been really key to driving financial inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit about how working with companies like GCash has helped to advance these efforts, and perhaps what lessons can governments here at Davos learn from the kind of collaboration that you have made sure happens?
Well, in the Philippine context, the collaboration between the public sector and the private sector, government and GCash in this instance, is very important. There are more wallets than bank accounts in the Philippines, in the formal sector. More Filipinos have access to savings, investment, credit with GCash, for example, in the Philippines, and with banks. More people have, like I said earlier, adopted to e-wallets than going to a formal bank. Government, particularly, has saved so much money, has been more efficient, less corruption, when we use, for example, GCash for our social amelioration programs. So we use GCash to support, let's say, millions of Filipino families when we provide them social amelioration benefits from the government. That is one example.
And what do you think governments here can learn from your experience?
Well, WEF is all about public sector and private sector collaboration, isn't it? So from our perspective here in the Philippines, our collaboration with GCash has been very important and has changed lives in the Philippines. We're also tapping GCash to introduce G-bonds in the Philippines, government securities, so that more Filipinos will have access to investments.
Mm-hmm. And Martha, how were you able to close this financial inclusivity gap that was so big in the Philippines? And again, it'd be really good to hear what lessons you might have for the world here at Davos.
I think Philippines is a great example where technology, the use of technology, was able to bridge the inclusivity gap. In a country like Philippines, traditionally challenged in terms of development and progress, now almost the entire country has adopted cashless and digital. And of course, we won't be able to do that without the support of the government, of the regulators.
Mm-hmm. 50%, if I'm not mistaken, 50% of all transactions in e-commerce today is, yes.
You're right.
Is through modes like this.
And to what Secretary Recto earlier said about the social amelioration program or the financial aid, this happened during COVID. So what would have taken the government 3 years to distribute money to millions of Filipinos, we were able to do in a few days. So that the people who needed the money the most during times like COVID, they were able to use it to help them cope with COVID.
So COVID was a big factor in that, right?
It was.
And so what lessons do you think can be learned here for other companies who are here, other apps and cashless-based companies?
I think while COVID was the trigger for the significant growth and increase in penetration, the lesson here is that we were ready when the world closed down on us. The Philippines, unknowingly, was actually ready. But before that, we were struggling with penetration because people didn't feel the need for it. But when the COVID happened, when the issue came in, we were actually ready. So I guess the lesson there is don't wait for calamities to happen. And actually, digital is the way to go. Because with digital, you're able to tap exponentially more people, and also the transparency that Rector referred to earlier. The underground economy has suddenly now was forced to surface because of digital.
So obviously, the economies of many countries are being affected by various issues around the world, including conflicts, etc., climate change. But there are economies in the Southeast Asia which are booming. In the Philippines, what are you doing to make sure that this economic inclusivity continues and that the environment is suitable for this kind of growth to keep going?
Well, as mentioned earlier, regulation is key as well. No? The Bangko Sentral of the Philippines, or the Central Bank of the Philippines, has a policy to ensure that there's more financial inclusion. No? We've also opened, I think we have 6 digital banks now. We're opening 4 more licenses in the Philippines. And on the part of infrastructure, digital connectivity is key. So today, about 75%, I think, have access to connectivity.
Yes.
And the government is investing in our national broadband, common towers, free Wi-Fi with the Department of Information Communication Technology, together with the private sector, so that we can connect 7,000 islands, essentially. And more Filipinos have access now to technology such as GCash. So 90 million users. The valuation now of GCash is something like $5 billion,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. It is the biggest unicorn in the Philippines today.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay. So that's big, but obviously, what's got you there are the grassroots entrepreneurs who have turned to GCash. Can you give us some examples or cases of these are people's stories and people's lives that we're talking about, right?
So in GCash, as Secretary said earlier, we have millions of subscribers. But what really powers us are the stories of these users. One of which is Kaloy. He lives in the south of the Philippines, in Mindanao. He lost his job during COVID. He used to be a bartender. So he lost his job, no source of money. But because he's a user of GCash, he had a G-score or a credit score with us. And he was able to borrow money, even though he didn't have employment at that time. And that allowed him to get a G-loan, we call it a G-loan, which helped him start a business, a coffee business using a bike. And with that, he became very successful, and he now has multiple branches in Cagayan, and he's also venturing into Metro Manila. So that's one. The other one is we have traders in the mountain province in Baguio. They used to be like they collect money from the buyers and pay it to the suppliers. It used to be cash-based, but because of GCash, they're able to collect real time, and they like that because it won't require them too much capital anymore because they can make use of the money as often. So the velocity has increased because of digital. So things like that, and that was able to bring his kids to school, and they're now in college, right? So a lot of real stories like that actually powers GCash.
It's amazing they're hearing from Martha and those real on-the-ground stories. And here in Davos, things can feel a little bit disconnected from people's real lives. How do you think that bringing the story of GCash and financial inclusivity in the Philippines can help bridge that gap between the elites here in Davos and the reality on the ground for many, many people?
Well, I think the example given by Martha here is a good example already how it has changed lives. Huh? Another thing is that it also helps the capital market development. In the past, the penetration rate or investments in the stock market in the Philippines was only something like 1 to 2 million people invest in the stock market. I think that has doubled when GCash introduced G-stocks
Yes.
in 1 year. So what took the what took us decades to develop has doubled in size in the last year.
Yes. And I think like sophisticated financial instruments that used to be available only to the rich
Correct.
are now available even to the mass. So in GCash example, we offer global funds for as low as $1. So the way we market it to our consumers is instead of buying a milk tea, you can invest into a global fund that's available in GCash, and you get the right to own a piece of Google, a piece of Microsoft, all those stuff, right? So things that were out of reach of the mass are now within their reach. And we see these companies here in Davos, right?
Yeah. And what are the biggest barriers, would you say, to continuing to ensure that financial inclusion grows? Obviously, we're talking about the Philippines, but I think a lot of those barriers are just generally, could be relevant to a lot of contexts.
So our vision in GCash is finance for all. And historically, we've looked at financial inclusion, so making sure that we use technology like eKYC to onboard people who are traditionally not documented or those who don't have IDs. We're working closely with the government so that we help them roll out successfully the national ID in the Philippines.
So that's know your customer.
That's
so,
know your
yeah,
customer,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So before, people needed to visit the branch one by one and go back and forth just to get a bank account. With GCash, because of our eKYC technology, they just take a selfie and scan an ID and they get an account, right? So that's one thing. But the other one would be, I think, working together with the government would be a real thing, and addressing poverty or the availability of money. That's the root of financial inclusion. If you really want financial freedom, you need to put money on the table. So we're working with the government on that to make more opportunities available to more Filipinos and using our platform to create that availability and access.
And how's that going?
I think it's going very well.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, government is tapping them for our social amelioration programs, and we're talking about billions of dollars here with more efficiency and less corruption.
Okay, thank you so much, Martha Sazon, and also Secretary Recto, for joining us here with your fascinating insights into how Fintech is already creating significant changes in financial inclusivity and driving economic growth and inclusion in the Philippines. Thank you so much. For more essential conversations, please do stay tuned to Reuters at Davos. Thank you so much for joining us.